Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Basketball Maestros podcast. It's been a fat minute. It's been about a month since our last episode. Obviously, if you've been following the NBA for a little while, this offseason has been very uneventful, and all eyes were on Mr. Kevin Durant and the trade request. Everyone was basically just on their toes, waiting for him to either get traded or back off his trade request. And obviously, it came out a couple days ago that he has met with Nets management and ownership that he is willing to back off his trade request and play for the Nets as his extension kicks in this upcoming season with 4 more years left on his deal. And that was kind of just the big question mark if the Nets were willing to trade a player with 4 years on his contract. And obviously, that's pretty hard to do. It's a lot of money, but plus, you've just paid this guy and you expect him to commit to his contract and be with the team. Obviously, he wanted out, at least at first. He reiterated that he wanted out a couple times, met with Joe Tsai, the owner of the Nets, said, "You either fire Steve Nash or Sean Marks, or you trade me." And then that was the last we heard until a couple days ago, where they met in LA, I believe. And Kevin Durant backed off his request, which was very underwhelming, in my opinion. Obviously, if you're a Nets fan, you love it because you get to keep your best player around at least for this year. Hopefully for the rest of his contract. Kyrie's staying around, so you're still going to be a very competent team if you're a Nets fan. So you're happy about that. But in my eyes, I feel like it was a lot of noise. Obviously, Durant was reiterating that he wanted out and he wasn't going to back off of it. And I was very curious what switched in his mind. I don't really get what made him just back off his request like that. I don't know if the Nets management had a huge pitch to him and sold him on it. But obviously, think it's kind of weird having Kevin Durant back after telling the owner Joe Tsai that you either fire these two guys or I'm not coming back. And obviously, those two guys are still there. Steve Nash, I'm not a fan of as a coach, so I can see why he wants him fired. But obviously, I think it may be a little bit of a weird environment coming back with all the demands he made and wanting out. But yeah, that's kind of just my initial thoughts. I feel like it's the right move for Durant. He has 4 more years left. You can at least play like 2 more years left, see what the Nets can do. Obviously, I think this is probably the best team they built so far. Adding Royce O'Neal, T.J. Warren, guys of those caliber, re-signing Patty Mills and Nicholas Claxton. So I think this is probably the best team that Sean Marks has built around the Nets. But for me, I wanted to see a trade. Yeah, obviously don't see a player of Kevin Durant's caliber get moved, and I feel like that would have been a pretty insane trade to see where you wound up. Obviously, Boston was like the number one destination at the time, but compensation pick wise wasn't lining up. But yeah, that's kind of just my initial thoughts on the whole Kevin Durant situation.
I think it was definitely I think it was definitely a high possibility that I think nothing would happen. I know he had like these demands and all these things that he just didn't like about the Nets. And when Kyrie requested, everyone thought that the Nets were gonna be all be one of the worst teams in the league again, but get a lot of draft capital back. But I feel like the main thing that kind of made this all stop, I feel like, was the Gobert trade and any picks that one had for, a player that is definitely not even close to what Kevin Durant is. So I feel like a combination of the Nets just feeling like they weren't getting enough back, plus, like you said, maybe they sold him on a pitch or something. I think that's why he kind of backed out. I feel like Kevin Durant isn't really the type of person to hold out and like not play.
Mhm.
I feel like for a contract at least, I feel like he will play. Kyrie, I think, is a little bit different, but I think he's just going to end up playing since Katie came back. So I think definitely, in that meeting they had, I think, roster was brought up. And like you said, it's definitely the best that they've had since those two have joined. And that's the best roster they've put around him. Um, and just overall, it didn't really surprise me after you kind of saw that Gobert trade and then you kind of see the KD stuff. It just didn't really seem like any team had enough to get a player like him. Now, maybe in like a year or two, I can see him definitely on the rumors starting up again, reports coming out. But it's definitely a storyline to watch of what happens this year with the Nets and what can happen next offseason and offseason after that if they don't be a contender like Katie probably wants.
Yeah, and I also want to commend the Nets because since Katie and Kyrie came to Brooklyn, they gave them everything. They did everything they wanted. Hired Steve Nash, went all out, traded all their depth for James Harden, traded James Harden away, and obviously now they have Ben Simmons. We'll see how that works out. But I'm glad that they finally uh, stood up to Kevin Durant and Kyrie. That listen, if you want to come back, great, but we're gonna run things a little differently. There's rumors that Joe Tsai doesn't like Kyrie and that he would like him gone, and Joe Tsai didn't really like how the team was running with those two stars there. So I'm glad that they're kind of turning a new leaf in terms of how they run the team. Obviously, you will probably still consult them on potential moves and stuff like that. But it's not basically just a player ran organization anymore, which I think is good for them. Um, and hopefully, this will all work out in the long run. I'm sure, as you mentioned, that it'll be brought up again if they have an early playoff exit or just flame out in the playoffs. I'm sure those will spark conversation again. In terms of the Nets as a whole now, there's a lot of questions of what the team would look like if Durant was actually going to get traded or hold out going into the season. Looking at the standings, I think they'll probably be like a 4 or 5 seed. I don't think they'll be better than Boston, Milwaukee. I think Philly is going to be better. James Harden, I think he'll have a pretty big bounce back year after all the noise in Brooklyn and in Philly. He didn't look the greatest physically, so I think James Harden will probably be honestly a dark horse MVP if you want to go that far. I think if he's really locked in, he was committed with a pay cut, wanted to see the team improve, and I think they improved pretty well. Obviously, signing PJ Tucker and Daniel House, Anthony Melton, those are all three very solid additions to the team. So I think they'll be in the mix as well. I think you could probably argue Chicago will be better than Brooklyn because Durant's gotten injured plenty of times. Kyrie, whether he's actually injured or just mentally just not there. And I think those are kind of the 4 teams that will probably be better than Brooklyn. I think an honorable mention is Miami, but most people aren't necessarily high on them anymore because they haven't really done anything to improve, or they lost PJ Tucker as well, which was a pretty huge loss in my eyes. So you could argue the Heat, but I think the Heat will probably fall back a little bit in the standings. So I think Brooklyn could probably be better than Miami in terms of standings. So even though this is the best team they've had in Brooklyn since these two stars have been there, don't view them as a contender. Um, don't see them winning a championship, at least this year, but you never know with injuries and stuff. But that's just kind of my early view as Brooklyn as a team. I don't think they're a contender. Obviously, they can be very dangerous in a 7 game series, but best case scenario, maybe second round at this point. But yeah, that's kind of just how I view the Nets currently.
Yeah, like like I've always said, especially in the past, with a team that has, good star power, they obviously could always be good, but it's how you surround those stars. And like you said, this is definitely the best roster around them. But if you just kind of look at the rest of the East, I just don't really know where the Nets fit in. It's just so weird because like you can see them being in the play-in because of injuries and because of how everything could work out, or you can see them like 4 or 3 seed if everything works out with Katie and Kyrie popping off. Who knows what Ben Simmons is doing? Maybe he'll oh wow, maybe he'll play or stuff like that. But it's just a lot of question marks. A lot of question marks with motivation, a lot of question marks with trust in coaching staff, trust in all these other factors with KD. I mean, maybe he agreed, but to play, but maybe he still doesn't have the utmost confidence with people around him. So I mean, those are all factors that you kind of have to look at and kind of think about when thinking about the Nets. So I think just that alone, I don't view them as contenders. That is just the bottom line. That's just the kind of the bottom line right there for me. Now in terms of seeding, I'm gonna go. It just I don't discarding injuries. I'll say I want to say three because I'm mycopium, but I'm gonna say 3 seed. Injuries and stuff obviously can push them down, so I wouldn't be surprised if things like that happen. But as far as the other teams, I mean, that would be ahead of him. Definitely Boston, definitely the Bucks. Like you said, Harden looks nice. I mean, who knows though what would actually happen when the season comes around. I think the Bulls will definitely fall off a little bit. And like you said, the Heat. I think the Heat will still be there regular season wise. I don't know playoffs wise. So I mean, there's like a lot of question marks in the East right now on what could possibly happen. But yeah, that's kind of my take on the Nets. It's just there's so many things that can go wrong, and there's so many internal issues that could blow up mid-season that I just do not see them as a contender. Now, maybe if Katie and Kyrie just have seasons of their life, yes, but after what we've seen recently, I just don't think that's a reality. So that's kind of my, take on what the Nets are looking like this season.
Alrighty, so that's how we view the Nets. Obviously, if you're a Nets fan, you're very happy that this got resolved, but obviously down the line things can definitely change as this team's been through a lot in the past couple of seasons. So we'll see how they fare this year, but yeah, and then moving on to the biggest news we've gotten in a long time. Uh the good old Lakers finally make a move. The trade was THT, Stanley Johnson, for good old Patrick Beverly, the Laker villain for many years when he was with the Clippers. My initial reaction, um, I was watching The Boys when this good old trade came through. I saw Lakers and Jazz in advanced talks or whatever Woj said initially. And I'm like, oh god, okay. And then I saw Patrick Beverly, which I figured what was going out, and it was THT. And I think initially it was THT, and then later I think it might have been Shams who tweeted out that Stanley Johnson was a part of the deal too, and that kind of turned me off a lot when I first saw the trade because the Lakers roster is very thin on the wing side. I think it was basically just Stanley, Troy Brown Jr., and Juan Toscano Anderson on your wings, which obviously isn't great in giving away Stanley Johnson, who's arguably one of the better defenders on the team. For a guard is kind of questionable, but looking back at it, I think for the short term, it makes sense. It's a win now move, and I think in the future it's going to look very bad because obviously trading a 21-year-old for a 34-year-old isn't great. It shouldn't look great a couple years down the line. Obviously, THT and a rebuilding team. Hopefully, Donovan Mitchell gets traded, which it looks like. But THT is gonna get the spotlight off of him. Go to Utah, wear those horrific jerseys that they have, and hopefully play better. Have a career year. I think down the line it's gonna look pretty bad. Uh, Granted, but I think on paper it makes sense for the short term. Obviously, you have LeBron signing his extension for 4 more years, so I think LeBron's on your team. You got to make win now moves. Uh, Initially, I didn't like it, but after thinking about it a little bit, it makes sense. But Patrick Beverly, I think, will provide a pretty positive impact. Obviously, as Laker fans, we don't have the greatest view on Patrick Beverly with all the antics he's done when he was on the Clippers, but I think he is a player that the Lakers really need moving forward. Last year, you can see it reached the lowest of lows, and I think a guy like Patrick Beverly holding people accountable, being a locker room guy, being a dog on defense, a decent 3 point shooter. Wasn't He was like league average at like 35% from three, but on his career he's about 38% from three, which obviously helps. But yeah, initially wasn't too fond of the trade, but reflecting on it a bit more, I think it makes sense.
Now, first off, we'll just go with what the Lakers sent off with THT and Stanley. I expect both of them to have then whatever next 2 years or whatever that have the best careers they've ever had. It's just kind of the Laker way to trade away young players, and then 2 years later they're literally like 10 times better than they were on our team. So that's fully like what I expect to happen. Um, Now I can agree with what it makes sense, and obviously we're in a win now mode. Um, and Patrick Beverly is like you always view types of players like Patrick Beverly, you hate them until they're on your team. So I've hated that guy for so many years, and now he's on our team. I still don't like the trade. I know it makes it like I fully understand everything about it. It's just not Patrick Beverly on my team. That's what I just can't get over. I just can't get over it. Like I've hated this guy for so long. Now he's just on my team. And I mean, the relationship him and Westbrook already have. I mean, I feel like LeBron kind of hated him for a sec there. And now he comes to our team. I mean, I'm really excited to see what he can bring and what he already has shown that he brings. Our defense is really bad, so I mean, getting him there to kind of bring the energy, bring what we've needed and what we felt like has kind of been missing from the Lakers these past 2 years is kind of what excites me. His offense doesn't really excite me at all, but the energy and defense, it definitely is what we need. But it really like THT had it on like this year is kind of iffy for him, but it just sucks to see him go with and Stanley as well. Just sucks to see them go since they're definitely younger players that you can see potential in. But like you said, I mean, we have LeBron, so we can't really waste time. I mean, sign that extension, but still, it's still a gamble every single year. Is like, hey, is LeBron gonna be here? Is LeBron gonna be the same quote unquote LeBron? So I mean, he showed it last year, so I think that's why the Lakers kind of make a move like this. They know that um, you can tell on the sidelines that he might be putting up the same amount of points as like numbers, but you can definitely tell that he's getting more tired, more injury prone, and things like that. So it just sucks to see players like that go. It sucks to see Pat Bev going to be walking on the court with a Lakers jersey, but um, overall, it's a trade that I understand that needed to happen, and it's a trade that like Matt said, it will look good for maybe this year and next year, but like 4 years down the line, it'll probably go down as one of the worst trades ever if we're not successful with him. So yeah, that's kind of how I view it. It's just you know, it is what it is.
Yeah. Um, it's probably just the Laker fan in me that really wants this trade to work out. On my Twitter timeline, I've seen the Timberwolf Laker clips of Pat Bev talking trash to LeBron and just out hustling our whole team, which is horrible to watch now because our team was just so bad. But it just shows what he brings to the table. And I think initially it's going to take a little getting used to, but I think he'll probably be one of the fan favorites. It might be a little bit of a hot take, but I think we can appreciate a guy like Patrick Beverly who is going to give it his all every single night. He's going to play defense. He's going to hopefully shoot the three well. We all know how the shooters work when they come to the Lakers, but fingers crossed there. So hopefully it works out, but only time will tell. He's an expiring deal. If we don't keep him after this year, it may be a little dicey looking back on this trade. If we don't keep him, but obviously if he's trash this year, then obviously we don't expect him to stick around. But only time will tell. And speaking of bringing it every single night, Mr. Russell Westbrook. All eyes shift to that man after this trade happened. Now everyone is kind of expecting a Pacers Lakers trade at this point. It was the thrown package of Buddy Hield, Miles Turner for Russ, and the 2 picks. That was kind of on the back end with the whole Kyrie thing, waiting on what Kevin Durant would do. Obviously, that stuff has settled, but now the eyes are back on the Lakers and Russell Westbrook and what resolution is going to come out of that. Personally, I'm of the opinion that Russ is gone. You brought up the relationship with Pat Bev and Russ. You could argue that if you're on the same team and you are working towards a common goal, aka a championship, you can put that on-court stuff behind you. But they've had plenty of media quotes about them talking trash about each other. Not necessarily all in on those two fixing it. Could argue those two have pretty big egos and think of themselves pretty highly as a basketball player. So I'm not necessarily buying on they'll put the beef behind them and work better this year. Obviously, Patrick Beverly, I think, replied to LeBron's tweet about him being excited about Westbrook this season. And I guess it's the right thing to say, but I just don't buy it. And I expect a Lakers Pacers trade to get done before training camp. Hopefully sooner rather than later. I don't think it will take that much time, I think. But the Pacers obviously got to know that the Lakers want to get this trade done. They want to get Russ out of here so they can kind of focus on training camp and the guys that they have going into the season. But I think it all boils down to the protections on the picks, and that may take some time. Necessarily, wasn't necessarily fond of giving up the 2 firsts for Miles and Buddy Hield. But I think now you're just kind of forced into that position. I think that's the only package that I guess you can justify giving up 2 firsts for. You could go back to Utah and get like Bojan, Jordan Clarkson, but I'm not necessarily willing to give up 2 firsts in comparison to Miles and Buddy. But I think a Pacers deal is the best case scenario, and I do think it will get done. Yeah, I think this is kind of just a precursor move, the Patrick Beverly trade. I think it just has to be inevitable for Westbrook to get traded. I just don't think it makes too much sense to keep him around. With you got a lot of uh, you got Patrick Beverly, you got Russ. Currently, you got Lonnie Walker, you got Kendrick Nunn. All those guys like the ball in their hands. They're ball handlers. So I think you have a lot of cooks in the kitchen. And I think Miles and Buddy solves those issues for you and um, raises your ceiling, hopefully. So I think a Pacers Lakers trade would probably be the best case scenario. And I think it will happen at some point. You want to give your thoughts?
Yeah, I remember us talking about Kyrie stuff, and I don't exactly remember what I said, but I do remember that I didn't I didn't like giving up as many picks as were needed, or like, more than one. But now that we have Pat Bev on our team, I think we need to give up as many as needed to get this trade done. It's just I going into the season, if we have, Russ, Pat Bev, and just those two together, like you were saying, like it's the like on the Twitter response, it's like what they have to say, but I can just already sense something going wrong, something happening. It's just like I feel like they're not friends, they're just coworkers, like that saying. It's just they're there to show up. Obviously, they'll unite to, have the same goal. Even if you don't like someone, I feel like in the NBA, you still have to work towards a championship, and that's what the Lakers brought Pat Bev here to do. But I just know that those two, with the attitudes they have, the big mouths they have, it just won't. Sometime in the season, it definitely will. Um, Something will slip, and then you can just tell the chemistry is down. I really want that Pacers trade to go through. It definitely will make me excited for the season. Um, Reinstall that hope that I was losing after, all the Kyrie stuff kind of just didn't go our way. You know, People are saying that we messed up not getting Buddy. Now we have another chance to get him. Same thing, not exactly with Miles Turner, but I would love to get him as well. Just another, big guy who, can shoot, and it's definitely something we need. Just shooting is just we desperately need it, especially with this team that we've constructed. Um, it just we have to get it done. There's no other way. In terms of when it will get done, I definitely think it should be done before training camp, but obviously like that we really can't control that. But you definitely want to go in the training camp with like some guys not being like, oh, am I gonna get traded? Or oh, like I'm not even gonna be here, so what's the point? So you definitely want to go in there with your roster, with everyone you're comfortable with, so everyone can, get that chemistry up, get all that stuff, going early on. But no, I mean, regardless, it's still exciting to be a Laker fan. I mean, I know like it does suck. It really did suck last year, but at the end of the day, we still have LeBron, AD, and if Westbrook, like I've said, can just do like literally like anything better than he did last year, it's still exciting to watch. But yeah, it's just the idea of Pat Bev and Russ. I can't get like that's just what I've been thinking about when I saw the trade, and then just kind of leading up to this podcast. It's just like, wow, I don't even know what to say about them. It's just they're on the same team together. Like after all that stuff, all those media quotes that you talked about, all those years of them quote unquote hating each other, now they're on the same team. But I don't expect it to be for too long. And if it does happen throughout the season, we're in for a ride. That's all I can say. But yeah, that Pacers trade needs to happen, and I think everyone around the league kind of should know that it's probably going to happen. Just a matter of when.
Yeah, and we talked about it in one of our in-person shows that Rob and Jeannie were committed, that they're not done. There's still moves to be made. I find it very hard to believe that Rob works towards this trade and be like, guys, we did it, we're done now. Like, Pat Bev cannot be, granted, he's a need for this team, yes. And I think he'll impact the team in a positive way. But he's not the guy that turns this team around, you know? And I think everyone can agree on that. And I think this Pacers trade will happen. Hopefully, we don't look back at this and regret what we said, but I think it just makes too much sense. I think both teams, Lakers and Pacers, are going to work towards something. I think it just matters on protections on the picks because I'm sure at first the Pacers want both picks unprotected, but I don't think the Lakers want to do that, and I think it's smart because Lord only knows where we are 5, 8 years from now. Like it could be very valuable picks, so you want to protect yourself from that. So I think it makes sense why this will probably take a little bit just to decide on what protections are fair and stuff like that. And if these two, Miles and Buddy, were to come onto the team, I think it makes you a very good team. Um, don't want to throw the word contender out there because that could very well go south. So I'll say they'll be a good team. If I were to put a seed on it, I'd say probably a 4 or 5. Um, you're definitely not better than Golden State. Definitely not better than the Clippers, but health is a concern there. Could argue Denver. I think Denver will be very good this year. Um, Memphis, you could argue they're a top 3, 4 seed as well. But Jaren Jackson being injured, I think that's a huge thing. But I think 4, 5 is realistic for the Lakers because I think it's kind of inevitable that LeBron, AD are going to miss games. So, with health being relatively good for everyone in the West, I think a 4, 5 is kind of where I want to put them. In terms of playoffs, I don't think they'll be a championship contender. I just think teams like Golden State and the Clippers are just all around a better team, even if Miles and Buddy come onto the team. But all I can ask for is a season that I can enjoy. It can't get much worse than last year. I think last year was the worst season in Lakers history. It was very bad to watch. And I think just having a bounce back year, giving whoever we play in a first, hopefully you pass the first round, but if you can give someone in the second round a run for their money, make it competitive. That's all you can ask for. Laker fans just want a competitive team. I know I do. So I think adding Miles and Buddy will go a long way into making this season a lot more enjoyable. And I think I'll definitely look forward to watching every single game this year in comparison of if we just get Pat Bev and just call it an off season, you know? So I just think that's kind of how I view the Lakers, even though we're not necessarily contenders if you put those two on the team. I think it'll still make us a very competitive team and a comparable team. And I think come playoff time, you have the wild card of LeBron and AD. If healthy, could argue one of the top duos in the league. So I think going into any playoff series, I like my chances with LeBron and AD, but obviously you have to get to that point first. So yeah, that's kind of just how I view the Lakers if this trade were to go through, and I really hope it does.
Yeah, that entire, that like whole thing you just said, you really saved yourself by not saying contenders. Um, it's just I cannot see this team being contenders when our star players, I feel like, will play like it'll be a blessing if they even touch like near 40 games, like both playing together. I mean, I think that if we are healthy going into the playoffs, regarding but we're not gonna the West is so stacked.
Mm-hmm.
It always has been recently, and it's just you think about it, and if we sneak in at an 8 or 7 seed, I just don't know if we win that series. I mean, you have to assume that, the Warriors will be up there. You have to assume that teams like, even Memphis could probably give us a run for our money. The Nuggets are coming in healthy. I mean, like you were mentioning, they're just teams that, you know, will be good. I mean, you have the Mavs, you have, Luca just being him. And it's just, yeah, I think the ideal spot for us to maybe make it into the second round, maybe even, oh Lord, um, you know, conference finals. I mean, maybe like that 3 to 6 area, something around there. I mean, maybe you want to maybe be yeah, I'd say around there. You want to avoid that 1 seed, assuming it's the Warriors at like all costs. Because I don't want to play that team until it becomes like championship or go home. But that's kind of how I view it. I mean, especially assuming the Pacers trade goes through. If Pacers trade doesn't go through, then I think we're all of our mindsets should shift to anything better than last year. Just because of how bad that year was. But I think regardless, if nothing happens, I think we will have a better year than last year. I just don't think that there's no way with the returning players that they're gonna kind of just have that happen again. I feel like I hope. But yeah, that's kind of how I view it. I just, you know, we cannot go into the playoffs as a 7 or 8 because I feel like we'll be a first round exit. So we have to kind of hope we get something a little bit higher than that. And that all boils down to, you know, LeBron, AD, health, and just how I feel like our defense will play. And also you can add in 3-point shooting there, but I feel like our 3-point shooting has been really bad as of late, but I feel like the defense is even a bigger reason. And just overall, it feels like motivation sometimes when you watch the Lakers. And that you can tie that with, hustle, but it just looks like we just don't have motivation to play defense. So, like I said earlier, Pat Bev definitely will bring that energy. So, if we can just, have health and then those two things, I think we'll definitely be not a contender, but definitely, one of those top 5 or 6 teams in the West, 100%.
Yeah, I'm interested to see how our defense looks this year because obviously, so far in this team we don't have like a designated shooter.
Yeah.
I remember hearing something. I think like Pat Bev's like our third best shooter right now. So shooting is probably best case scenario, middle of the pack. And I think we're like bottom, I think very bottom of 3-point shooting or one of the bottom three in 3-point shooting. So obviously isn't great, but our defense was awful too. So who knows? Maybe the defense makes up for the offense, but we'll see what Darvin Ham does. I think Darvin Ham will definitely get our defense a lot better. It's kind of hard to make our defense worse than last year. So I have faith in him there. So we'll see how that moves or how that looks going forward into the season. Hopefully a trade gets done so we can have more stuff to talk about. But we can also talk about the Donovan Mitchell situation. How we view the Knicks, assuming they get Donovan Mitchell. Um, Obviously, Donovan Mitchell has been another player that has been talked about recently. He has been linked to the Knicks a lot. He follows New York sports teams, I believe, as well. I think he's a Mets fan. So he's been linked to New York. I think eventually, I think Brian Windhorst said this today. The Jazz are trying to expedite the process, trying to make this trade happen with New York. You get Donovan out of Utah, which I think makes sense because Danny Ainge coming into the front office, Donovan Mitchell wasn't his guy. He didn't draft him, so he probably doesn't have much connection with Donovan Mitchell, nor does it make sense to keep him around when obviously the team is not competing at all in terms of just playoff seeding in general. They're definitely not anywhere near championship contention anytime soon. So I think makes sense for Danny Ainge and Donovan Mitchell, even though he hasn't said he wanted to trade, just to get him out. Obviously, you brought up earlier, the whole Rudy Gobert situation. That makes it a little more difficult because Danny Ainge was the mastermind behind the Timberwolves trade. Got 5 first-round picks, 6 if you want to talk about the Timberwolves first-round pick that they used this year on Walker Kessler. So you could bump it up to 6 if you want to get technical, but it'll be interesting to see the return in terms of picks for Donovan Mitchell. I think we can all agree that Donovan's a much better and talented player than Rudy Gobert. So we'll see how many picks the Knicks are willing to give up. I think it'll probably be 5. I think maybe 6, but I think 6 is probably pushing it. If he were to go to the Knicks, don't necessarily know if I'm all too high on them. They have a really small backcourt with Jalen Brunson and Donovan Mitchell if that were to happen. Both pretty small guards, not great defenders either. Julius Randle, not a lot of people are high on after last year, which makes sense, but I think Julius will probably be better this year. But honestly, I think the Knicks can maybe be a playing team because honestly, looking at it, not better than Miami, definitely not Boston, not Milwaukee, not Philly, not Toronto, not Chicago. Brooklyn all depends on health, but I would assume that Brooklyn would be better than New York. Atlanta, you can argue the fit's a little wonky with DeJounte and Trey, but you think that they'd be better than New York. Cleveland, obviously, they got riddled by injuries, but obviously still a very good young team. So that's like 9 teams right there that you can argue are better than New York. The one team, Charlotte, they were the 10th seed last year. Maybe the Knicks can squeeze into a 10th seed, but I feel like with the Donovan Mitchell, Jalen Brunson, Julius Randle, yeah, Mitchell Robinson, Evan Fournier, still got a decent amount of. You got a comparable team, but just not good enough in terms of playoff seeding. Could very well see them be in the playing situation. Obviously, I think they were the 4 or 5 seed the year after the bubble, and then just not making the playoffs last year. So, yeah, interesting to see how the Knicks look, assuming they get Donovan Mitchell. I think they will. It just makes sense for Utah just to move off of Donovan at this point. But even if the Knicks get him not too high on the team, the East has just gotten better and better as the years go on. But yeah, that's kind of just my view on the Knicks. It'll definitely make their team exciting seeing Donovan Mitchell there. They've been looking for that star for what feels like decades now, so they'd finally get it in Donovan. I think it'd be fun to see Donovan in New York and watch some of their games from time to time. But yeah, that's just how I view the Knicks and the Donovan Mitchell situation.
Yeah, I haven't really paid attention to the situation as much, but I know that the rumors of him getting moved are kind of sparking up. But I think, like we said really early on in the show with THT going there, and um, it kind of just feels like the Jazz are definitely getting ready to get rid of him. But in terms of where he'll go, I have absolutely no clue. But I mean, I'll kind of go off of what you were saying with the Knicks. I don't. If they even like got Donovan, like that team is still like really bad. With like, I mean, like respectfully, like I just don't think Donovan will really. I think they'll make games more competitive and definitely sell more tickets, but I think realistically they don't really get that far in the East or that high seed. I mean, it's kind of obvious the team still roster wise is really bad. Um, and I just feel like they don't have the kind of the players really to even be that successful. And I mean, I don't know, Donovan. This we have all known that he was gonna get, or we all felt like he was gonna get traded this offseason. It just, with Rudy going, and then it just Gee, the Jazz were saying for, a little bit that, "Oh, yeah, we're gonna keep him. Oh, he's our guy," but you kinda just have to look at it, like, you just traded Gobert, and look how much you got back for him. Imagine if pick up the phone and call some teams about Donovan and how your future could look. But that's just kinda all I have on it. If he were to go to the Knicks, the team isn't that much better. The Jazz, I feel like, would win any trade, just because of how the East is looking, and, but, the Knicks have no problem opening up, checkbooks to write out the massive extension that he probably would want and all that. But yeah, I don't really know where else he can go. Don't know what else makes sense and which team would want to give up a lot. But as I feel like we always say, when a big player, the Knicks make sense because they want that big star, they want that ticket seller. But yeah, that's kind of what I see with it.
Yeah, and then when naming off players on the Knicks, I completely forgot about RJ. So RJ is obviously um, one of their best players, and I
Hmm.
think he'll probably take a big leap this upcoming year. But yeah, that's kind of just how we view the whole Donovan Mitchell situation, and I think that will do it for this episode of the podcast. If you made it this far, thank you for listening. Greatly appreciate it. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Follow us on all our socials on Instagram and TikTok at the Basketball Maestros. And hopefully, we have some more fun stuff to talk about in the coming days or week or so. But yeah, finally got some news, finally got stuff to talk about. So that's always fun. Hopefully, more stuff, aka just a Lakers trade, so we can finally get Russell Westbrook out of LA and look towards a brighter future. But yeah, that'll about do it. And yeah, we'll see you guys next time.